What if I told you that in ancient China, people cooked eggs in children's urine, emperors believed drinking liquid mercury would make them immortal, and some families married their daughters to the dead? As shocking as it sounds, these weren't random stories. They were real customs and traditions that lasted for centuries. Behind the great inventions of paper, the compass, and gunpowder, China also hid practices so bizarre, brutal, and unbelievable that they almost sound like myths. Today we're diving into the strange world of ancient China, a place where beauty could mean lifelong pain, loyalty could cost you 9 generations of family, and power was measured in the length of your fingernails. But the first custom we'll explore might just be one of the most disturbing beauty standards in human history: lotus feet. For nearly 1,000 years, beauty in China was measured not by the face, but by the size of a woman's feet. The practice was called foot binding, and it began when girls were as young as 5. Their toes were bent under the sole, the bones were broken, and the feet were tightly wrapped to stop them from growing. The goal was to create what they called the golden lotus, feet no longer than 3 inches. The smaller the foot, the higher the status. To wealthy men, the shuffle of a woman with bound feet was considered alluring, even seductive. But behind that image was a lifetime of pain. Women struggled to walk, infections spread easily, and some even lost their toes to gangrene. Yet refusing to bind your feet carried a price of its own. Many women without lotus feet were deemed unworthy of marriage. What began as an elite fashion turned into a nationwide expectation, trapping millions of women in a tradition that quite literally reshaped their lives. And as extreme as this beauty standard was, it wasn't the only ritual that seems unthinkable today. In fact, even the emperor's most private moments were ruled by a system stranger than any fairy tale: the emperor's intimate schedule. In ancient China, even the emperor's love life wasn't private, it was a matter of state. Each night, his intimate encounters were carefully planned and documented like government business. The imperial harem was arranged by sacred numbers: 1 empress, 3 senior consorts, 9 middle consorts, 27 junior consorts, and 81 concubines. Together, they formed a living pyramid of hierarchy, where every woman's role, even in the bedroom, was predetermined. Before entering the emperor's chamber, a woman was bathed, inspected, and presented at the appointed hour. Officials recorded her name, the exact time, and whether the ritual was fulfilled. Nothing was left to chance. Even the emperor's energy, his desires, and his emissions were logged for posterity. Special attendants oversaw the process, aligning encounters with lunar cycles, as if the emperor's body itself were a tool for cosmic balance. Desire became discipline, and intimacy became another extension of absolute power. And while the emperor's private life was monitored by scribes, ordinary families had their own bizarre routines, especially when it came to one of the most basic human needs: using the toilet. Pigsty toilets. For the common people of southern China, practicality always came first, even when it came to using the bathroom. In many villages, the household toilet was built directly above a pigsty. The setup was simple. Waste dropped through a hole in the floor, and the pig below ate it. To us, the idea is revolting, but to peasants living in poverty, it was seen as ingenious. No cesspools, no waste to dispose of, and no extra feed for the pigs. Everything was recycled. Human waste became part of the animal's diet, and later the animal itself was eaten by the family. Sanitation, as we think of it today, didn't exist. Instead, efficiency and survival mattered most. These pig toilets were so common that they remained in use in some regions well into the 20th century. For generations of peasants, it wasn't shameful or disgusting. It was just a daily life. But as disturbing as this practice might sound, it wasn't nearly as life-altering as what some families chose to do to their own sons, cutting away their future in exchange for a chance at power. Castration for state service. In ancient China, there was one way for a man from a poor family to step into the halls of power. He had to give up his manhood. Eunuchs, men who had been castrated, were the gatekeepers of the imperial palace. They served the emperor, his harem, and the secret channels of court politics. For many families, offering a young boy to this fate was seen as an investment. The procedure was often carried out by by relatives when boys were just 8 to 12 years old. Some didn't survive the bleeding. Those who did lived with permanent physical changes, high voices, altered bodies, and the knowledge that their future would be forever tied to the palace. Yet despite the sacrifice, eunuchs could become some of the most powerful figures in the empire. By the Ming and Qing dynasties, many eunuchs held more influence than ministers, whispering secrets in the emperor's ear and controlling access to him. Some nobles feared them more than the throne itself. It was a brutal trade, a lifetime of personal loss in exchange for a chance to command power. And while eunuchs ruled within the palace walls, outside, the emperor's authority stretched into every corner of life, even controlling the very words people were allowed to say. Forbidden words virgins and liquid metal life in ancient China wasn't just ruled by law, it was ruled by fear and superstition. Even language was dangerous. Uttering or writing the emperor's name was forbidden. If a word even sounded like part of his name, people avoided it. A slip of the tongue or a single mistake in calligraphy could mean a public beating, exile, or even execution. The emperor's very name belonged to him alone. No one else dared claim it. But taboos didn't end with words. Emperors also turned to Taoist teachings that promised them eternal youth. One belief claimed that a man's life force, his yang, could be replenished by absorbing the yin energy of young girls, preferably virgins. Some rulers surrounded themselves with teenage girls, not for romance, but to steal their vitality. Sometimes they were simply made to sleep beside the emperor, touching specific points on his body in the hope of transferring energy. And as if that weren't bizarre enough, the search for immortality went even further. Alchemists promised elixirs of eternal life made from mercury, sulfur, and powdered gold. Rulers drank them in massive doses, believing the incorruptible metals would pass their power into the body. Instead, they were poisoned from within. Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor, famously died from mercury pills, a tragic irony for a man desperate to live forever. Belief, fear, and desperation shaped every part of life, sometimes costing people their voices, their innocence, or even their lives. But for those who broke the rules, the consequences could be far worse. Extreme punishments. When it came to punishment, ancient China believed in making examples, often brutal ones. Crimes weren't just paid for by the guilty. Sometimes they echoed through entire families and generations. One of the harshest penalties was limb amputation. Thieves could lose their hands, escapees their feet, and rebels all 4 limbs, leaving them alive but crippled. These people were called formless, living warnings that no one was allowed to help in public. Even worse was the execution of 9 generations. If someone was accused of treason, it wasn't just them who suffered. Parents, children, cousins, sometimes every relative sharing the same surname, could be killed or enslaved. One person's crime could wipe out an entire bloodline. There was also facial branding, where a burning hot knife stamped words like thief or traitor onto the skin. The mark never faded, condemning a person to lifelong shame and social exile. These punishments weren't hidden in dungeons. They were carried out in public, meant to terrify anyone thinking of breaking the law. In a world where obedience was survival, justice was as much about fear as it was about order. And yet, while the state ruled with iron cruelty, ordinary people lived with strange customs of their own, some so bizarre they sound almost unbelievable today. Strange customs among common people. Not all strange practices in ancient China came from emperors or officials. Everyday people had their own customs that to us sound almost unimaginable. In rural villages, lice were a fact of life. Bathing was rare, clothes went unwashed, and parasites were everywhere. Some people crushed lice on their bodies and then ate them. The belief was that by swallowing the parasite, they closed the cycle, preventing it from leaping to someone else. Disgusting to us, but for them, it was a kind of folk medicine. Death brought its own rituals. Families often feared that an unmarried loved one would be lonely in the afterlife. To solve this, they arranged ghost marriages, posthumous weddings between the dead. Coffins were decorated with wedding figurines, and sometimes a living woman was married off to a deceased man, forced to remain his widow for life. Hospitality could also take shocking forms. In remote mountain villages, if a traveler came to stay, the ultimate honor was offering him the host's wife for the night. Refusing was considered an insult. It wasn't seen as betrayal, but tradition. The guest might even leave a gift, which raised the family's social standing. And then there was medicine. In some regions, people believed urine carried life energy, especially from young boys. It was used in remedies, beauty treatments, and even food. In Zhejiang province, locals boiled eggs in boys' urine, calling them spring eggs. They were believed to strengthen the body, and incredibly, some communities still practice this today. These customs show how ordinary life could be just as strange and sometimes just as unsettling as anything happening inside the palace walls. But when it came to symbols of power and ritual, China reached levels of extravagance and severity that stunned even its own people. Power, rituals, and the theater of authority. In imperial China, power wasn't just about armies or wealth. It was displayed in ways designed to shock and awe. Some of these displays bordered on the absurd. Take fingernails, for example. Among nobles in the Qing dynasty, long nails weren't just fashion. They were proof of privilege. A nail grown 4 to 6 inches long meant you never worked with your hands. Servants had to feed you, dress you, even scratch your skin. The longer the nails, the higher the rank. Break one and it was a public disgrace. Officials were known to hide their hands in shame if their nails were too short. Even government business carried bizarre rituals. Officials often began their reports to the emperor by beating themselves. Some slapped their faces or chests. Others brought sticks to bruise their backs before daring to speak. It wasn't punishment. It was submission, a way of saying, I am not worthy to stand before the Son of Heaven. And then there were practices that went beyond humiliation to outright horror. Human sacrifices were common in early dynasties, with prisoners, slaves, and even concubines buried alive to honor gods or ancestors. Archaeological sites still reveal mass graves where bodies were carefully arranged, silent offerings to secure cosmic balance. Executions, too, were turned into spectacles. One of the most feared was being sawed in half. Victims were hung upside down, kept alive by the rush of blood to their heads, and slowly cut apart from the groin downward. The cruelty wasn't hidden. It was staged, designed to burn fear into the minds of everyone watching. These extremes remind us that authority in ancient China wasn't just enforced, it was performed. Power was made visible through beauty, ritual, and terror, leaving marks on society that lasted for centuries. From crushed bones to bound feet, from drinking mercury to sacrificing entire families, ancient China was a world where beauty, power, and survival were shaped by customs that seem unthinkable today. To us, these practices sound shocking, even grotesque, but to the people who lived them, they were normal. The rhythms of daily life passed down for centuries. What makes these traditions so fascinating is how they reveal the other side of history. Behind the great inventions, philosophies, and dynasties we admire, there was also cruelty, superstition, and rituals that tested the limits of human endurance. And perhaps the strangest part is this: echoes of some of these practices still exist today, hidden in folk medicine, festivals, or cultural memory. History doesn't always vanish. Sometimes it lingers in ways we least expect. So when we think of ancient China, we shouldn't just picture emperors on golden thrones. We should also remember the ordinary people, the strange customs, and the extremes that defined their world. A reminder that what feels normal to us today might look just as strange to future generations. If you thought these traditions were shocking, just wait until you hear the other bizarre stories hidden in history. Which of these customs surprised you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to see what you think. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the strange side of ancient China, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next video. We've got even more unbelievable stories from history coming your way. Thanks for watching, and remember, history isn't just about what we know, it's about what we can't believe people once thought was normal.